The 1970s were a very interesting time. The Pentagon Papers were released by Time magazine to reveal the American people lies that were told by the American government. This gave the American people a reason to doubt politics. The papers revealed the amount of troops being lost in the Vietnam War, funding, and why the war was an option. In 1972, a scandal that would change the view of the American people on politics occurred. In Washington, D.C., a break-in occurred at the Watergate complex. When news reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward investigated the break-in, they discovered a plot to re-elect President Nixon. The finding resulted in a distrust of government, ultimately causing Nixon to resign. The break-in occurred on June 28th. 5 men were caught in an office. The men were wearing black business suits and latex gloves. When Frank Willis, a 24-year-old security guard, went on patrol, he noticed office doors taped shut. After removing tape off a door and returning 5 minutes later to see the door re-taped, Willis then called officers to come investigate. When the officers arrived at 2:30 a.m. and caught the burglars on the 6th floor, they noticed that the offices were tampered with. The 5 men had foreign accents and had about $1,000 in $100 bills. 3 of these men were later identified as Cuban. File drawers were pulled out and papers were on the floor. The papers were of national defense and business forms. 3 of the men were previously involved with the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. When the men were searched, they were discovered with pen-sized tear gas guns, police receivers, 2 35mm cameras, and 10 rolls of unexposed film. After articles were published, news reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward of the Washington Post decided to further investigate the break-in. Although they were able to get credible information, they were not the first to begin the investigation. An article by the New York Times was released upon the discovery of 4 different bank accounts linked to the campaign office of re-electing the president. The accounts were traced back to Mexico and Miami. Bob Woodward discovered a 5th account with a payment of $25,000. That led back to the campaign office. Woodward and Bernstein attempted to defend Nixon, but later on changed upon further investigation. It was later revealed that the accounts were ran by the head financial officer of the campaign to re-elect President Nixon. The $25,000 was led to a hush fund directly into the re-election office's safe. Woodward and Bernstein discovered that John M. Mitchell was in charge of personally approving transfer money to the accounts of Maurice Stan in charge of finance. All of these people involved were a deep part of re-electing President Nixon. Woodward had an inside source, Deep Throat, that would help confirm Bernstein and Woodward's information and gave them a hint to investigate a new area. Deep Throat had a signature of a backwards F, a hint to his true identity revealed in 2008. Only a few knew of Deep Throat's true identity. Woodward, Bernstein, the Post executive editor Benjamin C. Bradley, and a Justice Department lawyer later discovered in 1976. Deep Throat would consistently remind the reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, to follow the money, referring to the bank accounts discovered. Other attempts were made to sabotage the Democrats, such as Republicans posing as Democrats in order to gain their trust, and then sabotaging their plans, like rescheduling events and not letting Democrats know. Some Democrats were paid off to help the Republicans. Woodward and Bernstein anonymously interviewed a Democrat that revealed thousands of dollars were being given in order to sabotage the Democrats. Democratic phone calls were monitored, later being a part of the Nixon tapes. After a 2-year-long investigation, on August 8th saw the end of this scandal. Richard Nixon came forth to resign. The resignation was required to be given in writing, and a letter was sent to the office of the Secretary of State. During the investigation, the election occurred, Nixon winning by a landslide victory on November of 1972. With Nixon's resignation soon after, this pushed Gerald Ford to take the oath and become the 38th president. After this large scandal, a distrust in politics strengthened. 3 years after Nixon's resignation, David Frost, an English television host, interviewed Nixon on the incident of Watergate. The political aftermath of Nixon was all revealed in these 12 interviews. The interview aired over 3 weeks, 4 days per week. Nixon was very defensive during these interviews about the hush money given. During these interviews, Nixon admitted he lied about the scandal, but told the truth about the fundamentals. Unsure about the CIA's involvement, Nixon revealed that he volunteered to resign. In Nixon's point of view, his actions were not a cover-up. He was within the law, and all of his actions were for the American people. Nixon ultimately revealed in his interview with David Frost, if the president does it, it's not illegal. This interview with David Frost was one of the only direct evidences that tied Richard Nixon to the Watergate scandal. Thanks to Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward's investigation, Deep Throat's information, and David Frost's interview, secrets were uncovered that the American people were left doubting the credibility of the executive federal government. This conflict was compromised with the resignation of Richard Nixon from the presidency.